Hey guys, today we are going to read more Muttley. So we are going to let's get started. Chapter 7. Welcome, Jimmy, said Miss Dobbins that afternoon. When Lizzie and Jimmy arrived at Kitten Paws, we were full to overflowing here these days, with lots of dogs and cats who need homes. We can use the help we can get. She barely stopped to smile at Jimmy and Lizzie as she unloaded giant bags of dog food from a truck for today. Just do whatever Lizzie tells to do. She knows the routine. Jimmy turned to Lizzie and gave her a salute. At your service, he said. It was funny. Now that she pretended much had permission to act bossy. Lizzie didn't feel as if she needed to. After she'd given Jimmy a quick tour of the shelter, she suggested, how about if we started by cleaning out the kitty litter boxes? That's the worst job of all, so I like to get it over with first. Okay, said Jimmy. I helped change my baby cousin's diapers. That's probably even worse. P.U. He held his nose and smiled at Lizzie. Lizzie smiled back. Jimmy was definitely in the better mood now that he was at the shelter, and he was being too annoying. Wasn't being too annoying. Actually, he wasn't being annoying at all. Maybe he was only that way when he had to sit still like in school. She led him into the cat room and showed him what to do. Jimmy didn't make a face or say ew the way Daphne always probably would have. He just got to work. When they were done, Lizzie and Jimmy took a moment to pay attention to the cats. Miss Dobbins always said it was important to get them used to being around people. The kittens seemed to love Jimmy and climb all over his shoulders to lick his ears. The mama cats sat nearby to keep a watchful eye on their kittens as Jimmy petted each one, holding them as gently as if they were fine china. Even Tommy, the old gray tomcat, wraps himself around Jimmy's legs, purring loudly. Lizzie stared. She had never seen Tommy do that before. Next, it was time to walk dogs. I loved taking the dogs out. It was my absolutely favorite chore here, Lizzie told Jimmy as she opened the door of the dog room. Jimmy's eyes brightened when he heard the dogs start to bark. He laughed. They're happy to see us, he yelled to be heard over the racket. He began to walk up and down the aisles between the kennels, stopping at each kennel door to look at the dog inside. Lizzie noticed something. All the dogs went on barking except for which one Jimmy happened to be looking at. That dog at the moment, it was Fluffy, a little Portuguese, sat quietly and looked back at Jimmy with his big, curious eyes. It was as if the dogs were waiting with interest to hear what Jimmy had to say, and Jimmy was saying things to them, things that Lizzie couldn't quite hear. He spoke very quietly and gave each dog his full attention. He held his hands up to the kennel doors so that the dogs could sniff him. Jimmy stood very still at each kennel. He was almost as still, Lizzie thought, as he had been when she had found him sitting inside his cubby. "You're really good with animals," she said to him. He nodded. "That's what I was trying to tell you the other day. My Gramps calls me the dog whisperer. He says I'm the only one his old basset hound, Sadie, ever listens to. She's very stubborn, but I can get her to do anything." "Cool," said Lizzie. Jimmy really did deserve a dog of his own. But if he couldn't have that, at least he could be around these dogs here at Caring Paws. "Ready to walk some dogs?" she asked. Jimmy nodded eagerly. Lizzie stared him off with the easiest dog, an old slow-back lab named Casey, who liked to be mossy around and sniff every single weed in the exercise yard. Jimmy clipped on his leash and said, "Come on, Casey." Lizzie followed them out in the yard with another lab, a yellow one named Molly. She watched as Casey trotted along, looking much livelier than usually. After Casey she had Jimmy walk Raymond, a peppy little chihuahua, and Popeye, a drooling bulldog that she decided he was ready for Greta. "Careful," she said. She handed over Greta's extra heavy leash. "Greta is really strong, and she likes to pull. Open the door." Slowly, Lizzie stopped herself. She was being bossy again and a know-it-all. Jimmy had been great with all the other dogs. Maybe she just wait to see how he handled Greta. Maybe he could learn to be a know-it-all, know a lot instead of know-it-all. Sure enough, Greta didn't pull one bit when Jimmy walked her. She sailed out of the kennel with majestic dignity and strolled down the aisle, gazing up at Jimmy with a look of total adoration on her big, jolly face. "Wow," Lizzie said to herself. She wondered how Muttley would act around Jimmy. Dogs seemed to be their best when they were with him. Maybe Jimmy could work some special magic with the sleepy puppy. "Hey, Jimmy," she asked when he and Greta came back. "And do you like chili?" Jimmy did like chili. And when Lizzie called to ask his dad if she could invite a friend to dinner, he said it was fine. Lizzie had hoped that there wouldn't be quite enough chili to go around and that she'd be forced to have a cheese sandwich for dinner. But unfortunately, there was plenty. Lizzie made a face at the big pot that sat warming on the back of the stove. When she and Jimmy got home, Lizzie could tell that Jimmy fell in love with Muttley and the moment he saw him. "Look at those floppy ears," he said as he sat down on the floor near Muttley's bed. Muttley opened one eye. Then he opened the other eye. He thumped his tail. "Hey, do I know you? I think I want to know you." He got up, shook himself until his long ears went flappily flap, and climbed right up onto Jimmy's lap to lick Jimmy's chin and nibble on his shirt collar. Just like Jimmy, Muttley seemed to have fallen in love. At first, sight from that moment on, Muttley didn't leave Jimmy alone. For a second, he followed him everywhere, sat next to his chair while they ate dinner, and brought him a toy after toy to throw and play tug with. If Jimmy stopped paying attention for 1 second, Muttley would sit back and bark that horse bark at him, ending with the long, sad ow. By then, Lizzie wasn't surprised, but Charles the Bean added Dad and Dad. But Charles the Bean and Dad couldn't believe their eyes. "What became of our sleepy puppy?" asked Dad as he watched Muttley charge through the living room, racing Buddy to see who would be the first to fetch a toy Jimmy had thrown. When Jimmy's mom came to pick him up, Muttley walked him to the door. Jimmy knelt down to give the puppy a big hug, then stood up and turned quickly to go. Only Lizzie saw how sad Jimmy looked as he followed his mom out the door. Muttley's ears drooped as he plodded back to his bed. He was sad too. That was when she knew Muttley and Jimmy belonged together. All she had to do was figure out how to convince his mom of that, and Lizzie knew that if anybody could do it, she could. After all, her mom Anne had not been a dog person either until they started fostering puppies. After Jimmy left, Muttley curled up into a tight little ball on his bed, tucked his nose beneath one paw, and went to sleep. He barely even moved when Lizzie gave him a good night pat. "What's up, Sir Snores-a-Lot?" Sir Snores-a-Lot? Sir Snores-a-Lot? She asked. "You're not sick, are you?" Lucy felt Muttley's nose. It was moist, just like a healthy dog's nose. "Should be Muttley?" she asked. He opened his eyes for a second, and she saw that they were clear and bright. When she leaned down to kiss his little black nose, Muttley's breath smelled sweet. All those signs told Lizzie that Muttley was probably fine. He was just back to his old ways. Muttley, the world's laziest dog. She petted him for a while, then gave him one last kiss on the nose. "I guess I don't have to tell you to sleep tight, do I?" She shook her head and smiled at the sleepy pup. Then she went off to bed. Chapter 8. Lizzie was having one of her favorite dreams, the one where she was in the land of dogs. Dogs, dogs, dogs. She was like a little boat bobbing in the vast sea of dogs. She could see dogs of every breed milling around, even the rare breeds, like the commander. Not too many people would have known what a commander was, but Lizzie recognized it immediately. The big sheepdog had long white hair, a curtain of ropey cords that hung to the ground. From his black nose to his droopy tail, he pranced around with the other dogs, his coat swaying back and forth with every move. All the dogs ran around happily, barking in their wonderful different voices. Lizzie heard the yip, yip, yip of the Chihuahua, a Chihuahua, and the deep booming bark of a big old chocolate lab. Only the Basenji and all the Malamutes breeds that don't bark sat quietly and waited for Lizzie to come pat them. Lizzie had even heard Muttley's horse bark with that special sound hounds saw at the tail end. Ow! She laughed and held out her arms and hugs and pats and pats. 5 dogs charged over and began to climb on her, licking her face and ears. They licked and slobbered and drooled, and Lizzie woke up with a start to find that it wasn't all a dream. She really was being licked. Muttley, what are you doing? Lizzie sat straight up in bed and wiped off her face with her pajama sleeve. Are you crazy? Cut it out. What was going on, Muttley? The laziest dog in history of the world suddenly wanted to play in the middle of the night. Muttley whined, jumped off the bed, and ran to the door. Then he turned around, ran back, and leapt up onto the bed and licked Lizzie's face some more. Whimpering and whining, again he threw himself off the bed and scrambled across the floor to the door. He looked back at Lizzie. He whined and barked and howled. Ow! He yowled. By now, Lizzie was awake enough to realize that something must be wrong. She pushed off her covers and grabbed her robe. What was it, Muttley? But as soon as she was out of bed, Muttley disappeared. She heard him running down the hall to the beans room, where he started to bark and howl again. Danger! Danger! Wake up! Wake up! Lizzie followed Muttley into the hall and stopped in her tracks when she smelled something strange. She sniffed and sniffed again. Then suddenly she knew it. What it was. Smoke! Her heart began to beat wildly. A few minutes earlier, she'd been dreaming a happy dog show dream. Now she was caught in a real-life nightmare. Was her house about to burn down? Dad, she yelled. Charles, fire! As Muttley skidded and scrambled his way down the hall to Charles' room. Lizzie raced to the beans room. She found him standing up in his crib, his eyes wide and his cheeks bright pink. It's okay, I'm here, she told him. She reached in to help her frightened little brother out. By the time she and the bean were in the hall again, Dad and Charles were up too. A sleepy-looking buddy stood next to Charles and yelled to be heard over Muttley's barking and howling. Stairs are safe. He had already run down, and back up again to make sure. Go on, down and straight out of the front door. I'll be behind you. He punched numbers into the phone as he shouted and waved them along. And Lizzie could guess what those numbers were. 911. Of course, the Petersons had a family fire plan. Lizzie knew that no matter how they each got out of the house, the plan was always the same. They were supposed to meet near the old apple tree in the far corner of their yard. That way, they would know right away if they had all gotten out safely. Lizzie picked up the bean. Usually, he was almost too heavy for her to lift, but now he felt light as a feather. She grabbed Charles' hand. She glanced back at her room, wishing she had time to save her model dog collection. But she knew that Dad would have to say about that. Come on, she said, as she stared for the stairs. Buddy, you too. Muttley, come. But that when she turned around, she could tell that Muttley was waiting until Dad got moving, too. Muttley barked at Dad. He ran around behind him and nipped at his ankles. Get out! Get out! Get out! He didn't stop barking until he had herd all 4 of them out onto the lawn and followed them to their meeting spot under the apple tree. By that time, his bark was hoarser than ever. Just a few seconds later, Lizzie heard a siren. Muttley lifted his muzzle to the sky and howled along as the siren drew closer. Ow! He sang out, but he began to bark and howl, too. The sounds sent a prickle of fear down Lizzie's neck. Was her house really on fire? This definitely was not a dream anymore. This was real. She didn't have to pinch herself to know that. Then Lizzie saw flashing lights and the big hook and ladder fire truck roared up the street with the boxy white ambulance behind it. 3 pickup trucks with more flashing lights pulled up and parked every which way in front of the house. Another ambulance roared in and screeched to stop in seconds. The yard was full of firefighters in full gear, hats, coats, oxygen tanks, and axes. They charged through toward the house and ran through the open front door, while Chief Olson and 2 of the EMTs from the ambulance trotted over to check out the Petersons. Is everybody okay? Everybody out. Is everybody out? Everybody okay? Chief Olson asked. Dad nodded. Any idea where the fire started? Dad shook his head. I smelled smoke, but that's all I know. He got out as fast as we could. The most important thing is that you're all safe, said the chief. He wiped his forehead and smiled at Dad. When we saw your address on the 911 call, we called out everybody, even these guys from Springfield. He waved at the EMTs from the 2nd ambulance. Dad shook hands with them and thanked them for coming. Then the front door opened and Meg Parker, one of the firefighters, came out onto the porch, holding something in her outstretched arms. Lizzie couldn't quite make out what the rounded shape was. Nothing but some extra well-done chili, called Meg cheerfully. Must have been left on the stove. Looks like it had just started to burn. Lizzie heard that, let out a breath, all in one big whoosh. Chili, he said. He slapped his forehead. Chapter 9. I can't believe I got all out here in the middle of the night for a pot of chili, Dad said to Chief Olson. Lizzie looked out of at the chief in time to see him hide a smile. Was he going to make fun of Dad? Lizzie knew how it could be down at the firehouse. The firefighters teased one another all the time, but the chief just shook his head. Next time, try not to overcook. It was all he said. Then his face turned serious. If it could have turned into something much worse. You did the right thing to call us. That's right, said Meg. What woke you up, anyway? I didn't hear an alarm in there. I guess there wasn't enough smoke yet to set one off. Lizzie looked at Muttley. Then she looked at Dad. Dad had been right about this dog all along. Muttley really was a little smarty. She knelt down to hug him. He saved us. She kissed his nose. To hug him. He saved us. She kissed his nose. Muttley barked and licked my face and woke me up. The chief raised his eyebrows. Did he? Now? Meg smiled at Muttley and got down on her knees to pet him. What a good boy, she said. Muttley stretched and yawned. Is it almost time to go back to bed? Meg laughed. This must be a foster puppy you've been telling us about. Sleepy, but smart, too. You sure were right about him, Dad nodded. Everybody else gathered around Muttley and started to pet him. One of the EMTs from Springfield looked up at Dad. A foster dog? He asked as he let Muttley lick his face. You mean you're looking for a home for this guy? My kid's been begging for a dog. Maybe it's time to cave in. Nice work, pup, said one of the other firefighters. He's a hero, said Meg. Another fire smiled down at Muttley. Do they have any more like him down at the shelter? He asked. Maybe I should go check those dogs out. Lizzie slept late the next day. The whole family did, but she headed over to Caring Paws as soon as she woke up. She could hardly wait to tell Miss Dobbins about all the excitement in the middle of the night. One of the guys was acting as if he might adopt Muttley, Lizzie reported as she finished the story. That was great, but she hoped that somehow she could convince Jimmy's mother to adopt him first. Muttley and Jimmy belonged together, and there were plenty of other dogs at Caring Paws for the EMT guy to adopt. And another guy said that if we had any more like Muttley down here, he would come check them out. Miss Dobbins wiped away a tear. She could be very emotional about animals. Every single dog at the shelter was the potential to be a hero, she said. Whether that means saving a family from a house fire or just loving someone who needs love, all these dogs ask for is a home. Lizzie felt tears spring to her own eyes. Everybody needs to hear about what Muttley did, she said. Maybe people would come to the shelter if they knew what great dogs we have here, and maybe more dogs would get adopted. Exactly. Miss Dobbins could we need to spread the word. It's called publicity, and we are long overdue for some good publicity about the shelter. We could have an award ceremony for Muttley, like on the steps of the town hall. Lizzie remembered the ceremony last summer for a firefighter named Joey. Joey had rescued some boaters whose canoe had turned over, dumping them into a lake. Chief Olson could give him a certificate. Lizzie could see it all now. When Jimmy's mom heard about Muttley's heroic act, she would forget all about not being a dog person and decided to adopt him. Jimmy would get the dog he always wanted, and Muttley would be gone by the time Lizzie's mom came home. That EMT guy and all the other people who had been inspired by the ceremony would come down to the shelter and adopt the rest of these dogs who needed homes. Everything was going to work out perfectly. I bet we could do it tomorrow, she finished. Miss Dobbins could surprised. Oops, Am I being too bossy? Lizzie asked. Miss Dobbins waved a hand. Bossy or not, it's a great idea, she said. And not the first great idea you've had either. She smiled at Lizzie. I'll call the chief now, but we'll need an article in tomorrow's morning newspaper to let people know about it. Could your mom write something? She's great with stories like this one. She always makes me cry when she writes about animals. My mom's still away, Lizzie reminded Miss Dobbins. Miss Dobbins looked at Lizzie. What if you wrote it? She asked. After all, you were there. You were a witness. I'm sure you could write that story. Me? Lizzie asked. I'm going to call my baker right now. She said, Miss Dobbins. He loved stories like this, and he loved the idea of you writing it. Lizzie knew who Mr. Baker was. He was her mom's boss, the editor of the Littleton News. She felt her heart thump thump. Could she really do it? I ordered pizza, Dad told Lizzie when he came to get her at the shelter later that night. We can swing by and pick it up right now if you want. Sure, Lizzie wasn't really listening. She stared out the window of the car trying to figure out the first sentence of the newspaper story. Mom always said that the first sentence, which she called the lead, had to draw the reader in. Should it begin with the facts? Muttley, a mixed breed puppy from the Caring Paws Animal Shelter, barks loudly to wake the Petersons family when some chili began to burn in their kitchen. Or maybe it should be more dramatic. 4 people's lives were saved when Muttley, a heroic foster puppy from the Caring Paws Animal Shelter, woke them up from a deep slumber and herded them out of their burning home. Lizzie, Dad stopped at the stoplight and peered at her. Did you hear me? I said we can have pizza for supper. He waved a hand in front of her face. I thought you'd be thrilled after all that chili. Pizza sounds great. Lizzie smiled at her dad, but she was still thinking about her article. At home, she gobbled down 2 slices before she asked to be excused. Then she headed upstairs and turned on the computer. Mr. Baker had promised Mrs. Dobbins that if Lizzie emailed him her story by 8 o'clock, he would get it into the next morning's paper. What a great surprise it would be for her family if the article was in the paper when they woke up. Lizzie worked hard on her article. Really hard. Muttley snoozed at her feet as she wrote and rewrote, struggling to get all the facts into a short but exciting story. When she finished, she read it over one more time before she sent it. It wasn't bad. Maybe I'm too bossy sometimes, she said to Muttley, but there are some good things about me too. I know a lot about Maria, said, and I'm not afraid to say what I think. Like Dad said, I'm kind of loving, like Mom said. And Miss Dobbins was right. Sometimes I have great ideas. She lay down next to Sleepy Pup. I'm a mix, just like you. Muttley squirmed closer to her, sighed contentedly, and licked her cheek. I love you. just the way you are. I love you too, Muttley, said Lizzie, and I hope my article convinces Jimmy's mom that you are a special dog. Later that night, Lizzie was sound asleep when she heard Muttley barking. Oh no, she sat up in her bed. Not again. Nope, she heard her mother say. It was just me. And then Lizzie saw her standing in the doorway. Mom! Lizzie jumped out of bed and ran to hug her mother. You came home early. Mom laughed and squeezed Lizzie tight. I drove all day. Your Aunt Julie is feeling much better. And when I heard about all the excitement here, I couldn't stand to be away from all of you for another minute, she said softly. Now go back to bed before your brothers wake up. It's very late. I'll see you in the morning. She kissed the top of Lizzie's head. Lizzie went back to her bed to lie down, certain that she was too wound up to sleep. But Muttley padded in and curled up into a ball at the bottom of her bed, and his soft, sleepy snores were like a lullaby. Chapter 10. Local Shelter. Mutt is purebred hero. Mom read the headline aloud. What's this? She took a closer look at the article. My special reporter, Lizzie Peterson. She leaned back in her seat and beamed at Lizzie. Well, what, Liz? What? Asked Charles. You wrote an article? Lizzie nodded. It's about Muttley, she said. She had woken up early that morning and tiptoed out to the driveway to get the paper, and heart racing with excitement. She'd read the article 5 times before she folded the paper and set it at her mom's place at the kitchen table. Yay! Muttley the Bean waved his toast, dripping jelly on the floor. Buddy and Muttley raced to lick it up. Everybody was in a great mood. It was wonderful to have Mom back. Charles was jumping up from his seat to hug her, and the Bean would not get out of her lap. And Dad refilled her coffee cup every time she took a sip. It made Lizzie happy to look across the table and see Mom there. She beamed at her mother, even without the newspaper article. This would have been a perfect morning. Mom was still staring at the newspaper. This is amazing, sweetie. How did you talk Mr. Baker into it? Lizzie shrugged. Miss Dobbins did the convincing, she said. Mom started to read out loud. Muttley, a mixed breed puppy from Ken Paul's animal shelter, became a hero when he smelled smoke in the middle of the night. The scrappy puppy raced upstairs, barking. Then a pot of chili left on the stove began to burn. Mom lowered the paper and smiled over it at Lizzie. Excellent lead, Lizzie, she said. Lizzie grinned. Keep reading, she said. Mom read through the article to the end. Muttley will be honored at the special ceremony on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. on the steps of the town hall, she read. The public is invited to attend. Dad checked his watch. 11:30? He asked. We'd better get to move on if we want to get the guest of honor there on time. He got up and started to clear the table. Muttley snoozed on the floor near Mom's chair. She reached down to ruffle the floppy ears. What a good puppy, she said. What a hero. Muttley licked her hand sleepily. Me a hero? Well, if you say so. So you're not mad that we haven't found him a home yet? Lizzie asked. Are you kidding? Mom said. He saved your lives. I love this puppy. This puppy deserves a medal. I bet Muttley will have a foster home by the end of the day. By the end of the day. By the end of the day, said Dad. When people hear about what he did, they'll be lining up to adopt him. Lizzie hoped that Jimmy's mom would be first in line, and some of the other dogs at Caring Paws held up crossed fingers. Once some of that public starts to work, everybody bustled around and getting ready to go. At the last minute, the phone rang. Dad picked it up. "Hello," he said. A moment later, he waved to Mom. "You go ahead," he said. "I'll follow you in the other car." Then he went back to the phone call. Then, when the rest of the Petersons and Muttley arrived at the town hall, a small crowd had already begun to gather. Miss Dobbins was there, handing out flyers about some other dogs available for adoption at Caring Paws. Lizzie waved at her. Then she spotted Jimmy. His mom stood behind him, hands on his shoulders. Lizzie ran over to say hello. "I made something for Muttley," Jimmy said. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a medal on a wide red ribbon. It was made out of cardboard covered with tin foil. "Hero," it said in big letters across the front. "Wow," said Lizzie. Lizzie said, "My mom just said that Muttley deserves a medal, but I never thought of making one." "That's cool." Jimmy knelt down to put the medal around Muttley's neck. Then he gave Muttley a long hug and a kiss on the nose. Lizzie felt a lump in her throat as she watched Jimmy whisper into Muttley's ear. Muttley's tail swished back and forth as he licked Jimmy's cheek. How could Jimmy's mom resist when she saw how much Jimmy and Muttley loved each other? Maybe by the time the ceremony was over, she would decide to adopt Muttley. "Hey, Lizzie," someone said, and Lizzie turned to see Daphne and Brianna. "That was a pretty cool article in the paper," said Daphne. Lizzie could tell it wasn't easy for Daphne to give compliments. "Thanks," she said. Now maybe it was time for her to give Daphne a compliment. After all, even if she was a pain, she had been really good with the animals at Caring Paws. Daphne was a mix too. "Who knows," Lizzie said. If we didn't have Muttley, maybe our house would have burned down. And it was your idea that we should foster him, so I guess we owe you a big thank you." Daphne smiled. "By the way, I might be able to come to Caring Paws this week," she said. "Me too," said Brianna. "Do you think Miss Dobbins will still need us?" "Definitely," said Lizzie. "I know she'd be really happy to have you back." Daphne and Brianna knelt to give Muttley some hugs, and Lizzie and Jimmy smiled at each other. Then Chief Olson walked to the microphone at the top of the steps and waved at the crowd for attention. "Welcome, everybody," he said. "Thank you for coming down to the honor of hometown hero." He held up a certificate. I'd like to present this award to Muttley, a brave and caring temporary member of the Petersons family. Chief Olson told the story of the Petersons' family. Chief Olson told the story of how Muttley had smelled smoke and woken everybody up before things could get serious. Then he beckoned up to Lizzie. Lizzie, would you bring Muttley on up? Lizzie looked down at Muttley, who was draped over one of her sneakers, settled in for a short nap. Psst, Muttley, she said, wake up. It's time for your award. Muttley stretched out all four legs and groaned, do we have to? Then Muttley rose to his feet and let Lizzie lead him up the stairs. His metal glinted in the sun as he sat next to Chief Olson. A photographer stepped forward and took pictures as Chief Olson handed the certificate to Lizzie. As she took it, she began to cry a little and had to wipe her eyes with her other hand. She was so proud of Muttley. Thank you, she said as the crowd applauded. She caught Miss Dobbins' eyes and added, and don't forget, there are lots of other great dogs at Caring Paws, and they're all looking for homes. Lizzie bent down to show the certificate to Muttley. When she straightened, she saw Dad making his way up the stairs along with a man who looked familiar to Lizzie. He have an announcement to add. Dad leaned over to speak into the microphone. This is Mark, who met Muttley the night he became a hero. Mark is an EMT from Springfield. He called me this morning to say that he's decided to adopt Muttley and give him a great forever home. That's where Lizzie knew him from. It was the EMT guy who had said he might adopt Muttley, and now he had been the first to speak up before Jimmy's mother had a chance to change her mind about adopting Muttley. Lizzie felt her stomach sink. She turned to find Jimmy's face in the crowd. She could hardly stand to look. He must be disappointed, but there was Jimmy grinning as he galloped up the steps two at a time. Dad, he said, really? You mean it? He threw his arms around Mark. Lizzie's head was spinning. Her own dad came over to put his arms around her. Isn't it great? He whispered. He turns out that Mark is Jimmy's dad. The guys on his crew want Muttley to be their firehouse mascot. Charles called just before we left to say that he had made up his mind, and I was so happy to tell him how much Muttley and Jimmy already loved each other. Can you believe it, Lizzie? Now Jimmy was on his knees and his arms around Muttley. Muttley's going to be my very own dog. Once again, Lizzie had to wipe her eyes. There was no question in her mind. Muttley had found the perfect forever home. So guys, we are going to end this video here, and the end. Bye!